Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to Law Excellence, a daily Hindu news analysis. Today we'll be discussing some important articles which appeared on 8th June 2020. Before going into discussion, we will look into an advertisement. Admissions have started for online live general studies PCM batch, Prelims cum Mains 2021 batch. For any queries, please call to this number 90521 93939. And also, we have a residential facility in Hyderabad campus too. As usual, our daily discussion is categorized into two: deep daily editorial enrichment program and TNA, targeted news analysis. In daily editorial enrichment program, we will be discussing those articles that appeared in editorial pages of the Hindu. In targeted news analysis, we will be discussing those articles that appeared on the other pages of the Hindu. And these are the page numbers of Hyderabad and Bangalore edition. Please have a look into it. Now, download link for notes in PDF format is available in the description below, and you can download there. Daily we have a current affairs quiz which will be opened at 9:30 p.m. So it is a test of 10 questions. You can register in this link elearn.lawx.in and you can solve the test. Okay, the first article for today's discussion is: in Persian Gulf littoral, cooperative security is key. This Persian Gulf region is very much important from both prelims as well as mains point of view. And geographical location of these countries across this Persian Gulf is very much important for prelims point of view. Now, what the article is trying to mention? The article is trying to look into the evolution of Persian Gulf as a geopolitical unit, and what is the framework that these countries have to adapt so that there will be regional stability and prosperity. And the article also traces the evolution of relationship between US and this region, especially with respect to Gulf Cooperation Council, which consists of various countries from this region. And the article also looks into the evolution or the shifts in geopolitical aspects among the various countries in the region, and also the change in role of various institutions. Finally, it looks into the importance, the geostrategic significance of Persian Gulf and these countries from Indian point of view. Now, regarding syllabus mapping, it comes under GS paper 2, international relations, effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest. And this is what the issue: India and Persian Gulf relations. This is an important topic even for mains point of view. And the dimension is relationship between India and Persian Gulf. The learning objective is to understand the relationship between Persian Gulf countries and India. Now we will try to look at the geographical location of this region, Persian Gulf. See, this is what Persian Gulf, and see the bordering countries: Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, and even Oman. So these are some countries which share their boundary with respect to Persian Gulf. This strait is very important, Strait of Hormuz. The article starts with giving a brief history of the Persian region. See, prior to 1970, the region was administered by the British. But after 1970, British withdrew from this region, and now the countries in that region started asserting their autonomy or their authority over the other countries. But in this process, US also started interfering in the internal politics of the region. And why US is so bothered about Persian Gulf? For two important reasons. One is because of the geostrategic importance of this region attracted US, and the second one, the availability of oil and other natural gas resources, because that time US need oil and natural gas resources. So because of these two factors, US started interfering in the political aspects of this region. And because of the internal rivalries among the countries of this region, and because of external interference, the region witnessed lot of turmoil. Now there is a responsibility across various stakeholders, especially the countries in that region, to ensure a framework that provides stability and security to the region. And how a framework should look like: the first condition or the first principle that has to be adopted in the framework, they should maintain they should provide conditions for peace and stability in all the countries that are present in that region. and most of the littoral countries right now in this region are right now in civil war situation. So this should not happen. So they should have peace and stability. And I think we have discussed before, most of the countries in this region have oil and natural gas resources, but they should have a freedom to exploit the hydrocarbons. It is not someone else from outside has to come and exploit. They should have autonomy, they should have access to the resources that are present within their territories. So this is one thing which the framework has to take care of. The third one, and this Persian Gulf is a very important region for navigational purposes. So there needs to be something called freedom for commercial shipping purposes. So that is one thing which this regions collectively has to ensure. And the other important point is they should have a freedom to access this geostrategic point called Strait of Hormuz. If this is blocked by some country, now what do you call, commercial shipping can't pass through this Strait of Hormuz. So to ensure that there will be free navigation, so everyone should have an access to the Strait of Hormuz. It should not be choked, or it should not be blocked by some country like Iran or maybe any other powerful country here. Now, what is the role of US in this whole geopolitical dynamics? See, there are two major powers in this Persian Gulf. One is Iran, and the next country is Saudi Arabia. Now, any external power, whether it can be US, Russia, India, or China, the relationship these countries have, these two powers there, Saudi Arabia and Iran, this will determine the course of relationship with the entire geopolitical unit called Persian Gulf, right? In the initial days, US was successful in its plans against Iran. Why? Because that time other powers in that region were also against Iran. So now they want US support against Iran. So most of the countries used to support US against Iran. So because of this, even US also was successful in the initial days. But right now there was a lot of change, and there was a complexity in the relationship amongst the countries in the region. For example, there are countries like Yemen, Syria, and Libya, where right now we are witnessing civil war. So now they have lot of complexity in the relationship. There are some state forces involved in this war. There are some terror outfits which are supported by some countries like Iran, who are fighting war in these regions. So there is a lot of complexity involved among the relationship the countries having right now. And in addition to this, the US was not at all successful in implementing the nuclear agreement with Iran, and we have seen how US government failed in ensuring better implementation of that agreement, and recently the Trump administration disowned that agreement. And also there is a perception right now across the world that US is no more committed in ensuring sub-regional security. Now there is a policy that American first policy is going on. So it is not at all interested to provide sub-regional security to other regions. Now what to do? Now, in addition to this policy of US, there is a lot of geopolitical changes that are happening in the region. For example, now Saudi Arabia power is fading. So I said there are two important powers. One is Saudi Arabia and Iran. But right now there is a decline in Saudi Arabian power. And there are some other new powers which are emerging. For example, Qatar, UAE, and Iran. These three countries are emerging right now as a major powers in the region. And also there are some institutions like Gulf Cooperation Council and OPEC which lost their relevance right now. Now what to do then? Now most of the countries in the region, now they are trying to restructure their relationship with countries like Iran and Iraq. For example, Oman has always kept the lines of communication with Iran open. Now Kuwait and Qatar, now they're also dealing with Iran in a quieter, in a silent way. And now UAE also initiated some sort of pragmatic arrangements with respect to Iran. So there is a shift in the geopolitics of that region. Now, another important aspect which the article is mentioning, the relationship this region is having with India. And this part is important from examination point of view. Now see, we have an Indian diaspora, almost 9 billion Indian diaspora is staying in this region. and we are getting some $49 billion of remittances from this region. And also, if you observe the bilateral trade between India and this region, it is almost amounting to $121 billion. Okay. In addition to this, if you observe the region, geographical location of India and this region, Persian Gulf is located in close proximity to our western coast of India. And if you observe the distance from Mumbai to Basra, it is a city in Iraq, it is almost around 1015-26 nautical miles. Okay. In addition to this, one of the issue that is bothering India and its relationship with this region is US imposed economic sanctions on Iran. Now, because of various other political factors, India has to succumb to the economic sanctions imposed by US with regard to Iran. Other than that, we have mostly cordial relationship with these countries. For example, Gulf Cooperation Council suppliers accounts for almost 34% of our crude imports. And also, many national companies of Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, they are partners in investing in our Ratnagiri oil refinery. What is India's approach towards this region is, it is not trying to capture any power by involving in this region politics. It wants the stability of this region, because stability of this region will benefit India. India want to have a freedom of navigation and access to the region's markets, especially for matters of trade, technology, and manpower resources. If there is stability disturbance in this region, it will affect India economically and also with respect to our diaspora who are present in this region. So this is what the importance of this region towards India. Now we will see what is this Gulf Cooperation Council. Now GCC is a political and economic alliance of countries in the Arabian Peninsula. It was established in the year 1981 to foster socio-economic security and cultural cooperation among the countries that are present in this region. Now the members, for example, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE are its members. They gather every year to discuss cooperation and regional affairs. Now we will look into the next article, paging the private sector in the COVID fight. Now, what the article says? The article mentions that the present COVID 19 situation exposed the weakness of the health infrastructure in India. At the same time, it also opened up the opportunities. So now it is the right time to tap the opportunities created by this situation, and especially the private sector potential has to be tapped. And the article also comes with a policy approach wherein we can leverage the role or the importance of the private sector in providing various services like laboratory services to handle COVID 19 cases, and also to provide hospital infrastructure and to provide better supply chains. We can engage and we can involve private sector in a better way, and this is what the article is trying to discuss. Now, regarding syllabus mapping, it comes under mains GS paper 2, issues related to health. And also it can be asked under government policies and interventions in development of various sectors and the issues arising out of the design and implementation. Of course, what should be the policy of the government? Obviously, right? So that can be asked under this topic too. Next issue is role of private sector in health and ways to leverage the private sector in policy making. So the article comes with a different sort of options which the government can follow, which the government can adopt to engage private sector in providing various sort of services. Now, learning objectives to understand about the role that the private sector can play in providing better health services during COVID-19 and maybe post COVID-19. Now we will look into the details given in the article. Now see, COVID-19 situation exposed the weaknesses the health sector in India is facing, and especially with regard to the resources the health sector in India have. Now it is the right time to mobilize resources for the better provision of health services. But how to mobilize the services? One is, yes, we have public sector on one hand, and on the other hand we have private sector. But regarding private sector involvement in providing resources in India, we don't have a clear cut policy framework. So now it is the right time to have a better policy framework to involve private sector in providing various sort of resources, especially in COVID-19 management. Rather than arm fisting policies of the government to engage private sector, we should have a collaborative as well as a holistic policy approach, so that voluntarily private sector will come forward and engages with the government or engages with the public sector in providing services. So there are some policy options which the article is trying to mention. For example, with regard to laboratory services, how we can engage private sector. First thing is with respect to testing capacity. Now we knew that the cases of the COVID-19 cases are on rise. Maybe in the coming days the cases will be further increased. So obviously whatever the resources the public sector is having may not be capable in really going for a mass testing. Now what to do? So obviously we have to engage private sector in enhancing our testing capacities. So this is one area where we can develop a policy framework where the resource of the private sector can be roped in. And next thing is co-location of private laboratories in public health facilities. Now there is a laboratory shortages. It is not the public laboratories can handle this much of mass testing. So in a public private partnership mode, private sector can be brought in and they can establish their laboratories in public health facilities. So this is one option which the article is trying to mention, co-location of private laboratories. And the third point is e-vouchers. What is this e-voucher? See, e-voucher is nothing but an electronic pass. Now this electronic pass or e-voucher is issued to some suspected cases. Now these suspected COVID-19 cases, they can go to an empaneled private hospital and they can get tested. Now whatever the costs that are incurred, now government will be reimbursing to this private hospital. So that is the use of e-vouchers here. And also see, most of the hospitals in India are located in urban areas, right? Now we have a poor health infrastructure in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Now how to provide health services there? So now government wants to bring, or government has to bring, something called mobile sample collection and testing facilities in these tier 2 and tier 3 cities with the help of the private players. So these are some areas where you can engage private sector in providing better laboratory services across the country, so that there will be mass testing. And one more area where we can engage private sector is health infrastructure. For example, we can rope in private sector to build up a ward, ICU ward in a public health facility, and they can operate them, and after that they can return that ICU ward to the public sector. And also we can engage the private sector to provide health personnel or health staff. Right now we have a shortage in health workforce. So to address this issue, we can engage private sector in providing staff at the right time. Okay, the third area which we can use private sector is to strengthen supply chain. As of now, there is a shortage in medical test kits, ventilators, and other biomedical supplies. To ensure proper supplies, we need to have a robust manufacturing ecosystem. But right now, the number of manufacturers we have who can produce this is, we are having a shortage. So what to do? We can engage the private sector to strengthen our manufacturing capacities, so that we can produce adequate number of testing kits, ventilators, and even other biomedical supplies. And the other important aspect where we can rope in private sector is in central intelligence system too. And IT system with artificial intelligence needs to be built, so that it should form as a backbone for supporting all public and private sector efforts in combating with COVID-19. And this intelligence system should seamlessly help in case identification, contact tracing, managing a telehealth center, and even in generation of e-vouchers, authorizing tests, and also in managing referral systems. So finally, the article comes with a set of policy options that government has to take into consideration to engage private sector, so that our health infrastructure and other resources will be strengthened. Now we will look into the next article, addressing the elephant in the room. Recently we have seen that a pregnant elephant got killed by consuming food bomb, and this food bomb is produced by a farmer. And we have seen this incident got criticized across the country. Now what the article is trying to look is that what made the farmer to produce a food bomb, and the food bomb is aimed towards a wild boar. Now he is trying to explain this situation in a broader perspective of animal man conflict. Now it also mentions what is the policy options the government has to take to address this man animal conflict so that this type of instances may not happen in the coming days. This is what the article is trying to focus. Now regarding syllabus mapping, it comes under GS paper 3, conservation, environmental pollution and degradation and environmental impact assessment. Now the issue is man animal conflict. This issue is very much important from examination point of view. We can expect a question from man animal conflict too. Now what is the dimension, what is the challenges in dealing with man animal conflicts? Yes, there is an increase of man animal conflicts because of the landscape changes, but how to deal with that issue? The learning objective is to know about the problems in dealing with this man animal conflict. Now what the article is trying to mention, now the article says that in India the laws do not allow the rural people to hunt animals. They cannot hunt animals, and also neither the government also can do that. For example, state governments cannot hunt an animal without the permission of the central government. Okay, it has to take permission under section 2 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. And what is the situation, what is the situation that happened in Kerala is that now the farmer wants to protect their fields from these wild boars. Now to protect wild boars from attacking their farm fields, they produced something called food bomb, and the pregnant elephant unfortunately consumed that and got killed. Now, why these wild animals are attacking the food crops? This is for two reasons. One is with the absence of large predators outside forest, and also due to easy availability of the food crops in the nearby places. Now, various animals like deers, monkeys, boars, and other species, they were trying to attack the food crops. So, do the farmers have any compensation for this? So the compensation provided by the government is low, even if it is being provided, and the farmer has to undergo huge bureaucratic process. And also the regulatory bodies like National Board for Wildlife and other forest advisory committees, which are meant to scrutinize and minimize the large scale diversion of forest land for developmental projects, even these boards are not functioning up to the mark. And many people call these bodies as, convert are being converted as a rubber stamping bodies. And also the government is also nowadays easing up environmental clearances and opening of forest for destruction to boost economy. So even in that context, the conflict between animals and humans are on rise. Now how to address these issues? One is, now the forest department has to come with a reorientation with respect to the wildlife territorial dichotomy. It has to do away with this dichotomy in management of this wildlife and human conflicts. The next article for discussion is profit, not profiteering. And we have seen in the recent times how private hospitals are charging exorbitant fees to treat COVID 19 patients. Now, to regulate this high amount of pricing, various state governments like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Gujarat, they came with a tariff policy to regulate the pricing by the private sector hospitals. Now the syllabus mapping is, it comes under GS paper 2, government policies and intervention for development in various sectors and issues arising out of the design. And also it can be asked under issues related to health. The issue is about COVID-19 management, and the dimension is the private hospitals role and their importance in regulation. Now the learning objective is to understand about the involvement of private sector in COVID-19 management. Now we will look into the details given in the article. See, in the initial days of COVID-19 management, only government hospitals were involved in providing various health services related to COVID-19. But later, due to increase in the cases, so now the private sector is also involved in providing various health services related to COVID-19. But in this process, the private hospitals are charging exorbitant fees. For example, for 14 days hospitalization in a private hospital, there are some hospitals which are charging some 7 lakhs rupees. So to regulate this much of exorbitant fees, various state governments intervened like Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. These states fixed a tariff policy and it asked the private hospitals they can't charge beyond the tariff policy fixed by them. So, violation of this tariff policy will be penalized. And of course, the state government should not be high handed in dealing with these private hospitals. For example, the Tamil Nadu government, before fixing a tariff policy, they started negotiating with the private sector, and based on this participatory process, they fixed a tariff policy. So now the state governments has to follow a balanced approach towards private sector. See, now we need private hospitals in handling COVID 19 management. The government alone cannot handle with this increased number of COVID 19 cases. At the same time, the private hospital should not be allowed to exploit the situation and to earn profits. Okay. Now the next article for discussion is restore April status along line of actual control India. Now, the article tries to mention that India is asking China to restore the positions that were there in the month of April. And the article also quotes China is asking to stop the infrastructure building India is trying to do across the line of actual control. So, these are the two things which the article is mentioning. It comes under main GS paper 2 international relations, effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest, and it is also part of India and its neighborhood. The issue is India China relations, and the dimension is border dispute between India and China. The learning objective is to know about the ground positions between India and China across line of actual control. Now we will look into the details. See, line of actual control is scattered into various points called as fingers in medical terminology. For example, finger 1 is on the Indian side at the Pangong Tso Lake, and finger 8 is on the Chinese side. Though the LAC line of actual control passes through the finger 2, the agreement between India and China concludes that LAC is co-terminus up to finger 8. And however, India physically controls the area up to finger 4. And this was the status till April. But in April, the Chinese stopped the Indians at finger 2 itself, and this was the first breach of status quo situation. The article mentions that now India is trying to restore the normal patrolling activities. That is, China must allow India to patrol and control the region physically till finger 4. And India is also asking China to move away from this Galwan Valley, which was an undisputed region before. That was the status of Galwan Valley in the month of April. But right now it was occupied by China. The third demand is that it is asking China to let India to construct infrastructure as part of this border agreement, which was signed in 2013. Now the next article is China's internal pressures are driving Xi's tough stance on border. So the article is an interview given by Jaydev Ranade. He is a former additional secretary to the government of India. The article gives some clarity in the recent intrusions made by China across line of actual control and why China have done this. And this is an unprecedented move by China in the last 15 or 20 years. So what are the reasons that made China to have this much of aggression across line of actual control? Now, regarding syllabus mapping, it comes under mains GS paper 2 international relations, effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest, and it can be also be part of India and its neighborhood. The issue is India China relations, and the dimension is effect of internal pressures of China on line of actual control. So the article is trying to mention there are some internal pressures on President Xi Jinping, which is reflected in the present policy approach adopted by him towards various external matters. For example, with respect to line of actual control, or with respect to Taiwan, or with respect to South China Sea, or with respect to Hong Kong. Now we will go into the details of the article, and we'll be emphasizing on those points which will be useful for us to write some answer when a question is asked on the recent unprecedented aggression on part of China across line of actual control. In what way the present situation is different to the earlier intrusions? For example, we have witnessed the Doklam issue, or even before that we have some intrusions by China across line of actual control. In a sense, this intrusion which the China have done occurred at multiple points along the line of actual control. It was there from Ladakh to Nokala in Sikkim. So this many number of points were never been the case before. and the forces deployment was also highest when compared to the previous instances too. And also the intrusion seems to be firm, and they appear to have been premeditated and planned. The article also counters an argument which says that the present tensions between India and China across line of actual control is because of no clear demarcation of LAC. Is it true? And the article says no, because there are many points across line of actual control which are clearly demarcated. For example, the Galwan Valley. The Galwan Valley is not a disputed point in the last 15 or 20 years. But why China deployed forces even in Galwan Valley, which is on which there is clear demarcation? So this is one issue. And why China is opening this many fronts right now? The article says that there are many reasons for this much of aggressive intrusion on part of China. One reason is construction of Darbuk Sheikh Daulat Bey Goldie Road. This is one reason. And the second reason is upgrading of defense logistics by India across the line of actual control. This is one reason for this increased aggression on part of China. And the third one is revocation of Article 370, which provides special status to the Jammu and Kashmir. So these are some fundamental reasons which are responsible for the aggressive posture of China across line of actual control. Now the article also mentions about some internal pressures that are responsible for the present policy of President Xi Jinping. For example, the economic situation in China and the trade war China is having with respect to US, and the stance which the Chinese president have taken during the Doklam issue. These are some factors responsible for the present policy of China across line of actual control. Now we will look into the last article of today's discussion, 7 myths about online education. So the article tries to break the myths that are existing with respect to the online education. So mains GS paper 2, it can be asked under issues related to education and human resources, and the issue is about online education. And the dimension is various myths that are right now in existence with respect to online education. Okay. Now we will look into some myths that are there in existence for online educations right now. For example, the first myth is that online teaching is meant for those people who are tech savvy and for young people, and it is not for old people. Is this myth true? No, irrespective of the age, everyone has to embrace, everyone has to adapt to the technology. So that is one thing. So now, because of this COVID-19 crisis, we are entering into new world where we have to use and we have to rely on the technology for teaching purposes. So irrespective of our age, everyone should get acquainted with the technology. And the second myth is online teaching is a stopgap arrangement. Now most of the people believe that, see, right now we are in lockdown situation, so after the lockdown is lifted, everyone will continue with their own course of teaching. So this is just a stopgap arrangement. So why do we have to train ourselves in the new teaching tools or new technological tools? But it is not a stopgap arrangement. Now if you observe the present trends, most of the universities, most of the schools, they have integrated online teaching as part of their curriculum. It's not just because of the COVID-19 crisis they started incorporating online teaching. It is almost part of their teaching curriculum. So in the coming days, it will be part of the teaching curriculum. So it's not a stopgap arrangement in that sense. Now the third myth which the article tries to break, most of us believe that online teaching is not egalitarian in this sense. Yes, it is partly true. For example, high technologies, high speed internet is not available for many people. So when you provide online teaching, it will be beneficial for those people who can afford high speed internets and who can have access to other smartphones or other gadgets. But of course government is also trying to promote this digital India program. So in future this online teaching will be also an egalitarian in that sense. Okay. Now the fourth myth is technology will eventually replace teacher. Is it true? See, there is a fear among some sections of teacher that this technology will replace them. But surely it is not true, because now the technology will ask for a new type of skills among the teachers, but their role will not be undermined. They can't be replaced. The next myth is students prefer face to face interaction than online teaching. So there is some assumption among various sections of teachers that students prefer face to face interaction. But what the article argues is that this assumption came from a strong adherence to the existing teaching learning ecosystem. But in reality, the youth always love to embrace new technology, they always want to try something innovation. So the assumption that students prefer face to face interaction is based on a false ground. And the next myth is online teaching is not as effective as face to face mode. Is it true? Of course, there are merits and demerits in both mode of teaching. But if the teacher is good and if the teacher knows what content has to be delivered and how it has to be delivered, so the medium doesn't matter much. And in that sense, online teaching will be more effective than offline because you can present something and you can use other type of technological developments too. And the next myth regarding online education is that the degrees and diplomas that are obtained through online education are not valid. Yes, right now in India, there is a strong feeling that degrees that are earned through distance mode, degrees that are earned through online education, they have an inferior treatment when compared to degrees that are earned through offline mode. But in reality, there is no distinction between the degrees and diplomas earned through online or offline education. Both are virtually the same. This fact everyone has to understand. And also, most of the online e learning that we are discussing is a blend of both online as well as offline. So, the article tries to break up the existing 7 myths with respect to online education. Now we will be discussing prelims practice questions. The first is consider the following countries. Which of the above countries surround Persian Gulf? So we have to locate those countries which surround the Persian Gulf region, and we have discussed an article with respect to Persian Gulf. Please post your answer in the comment section. Next question, consider the following statements with respect to Gulf Cooperation Council. So Gulf Cooperation Council is an alliance of 6 Arabian to countries to regulate oil prices, and it includes both Iraq and Iran. Which of the above statements is correct regarding Gulf Cooperation Council? So with that, we have done our discussion. So thank you one and all.